Welcome to Philosophy and Critical Thinking, the basics. In our last video, we talked about what arguments are. In this video, we're going to be talking about why we argue, the common reasons to why we argue, and why we should argue in the world of philosophy. Common reasons to why we might try and argue is to win the argument. Winning the argument could be trying to prove that we're right and the other person is wrong. We could be trying to make them look silly or make us look smart. This is what can sometimes be a reason we might want to try and quote unquote win the argument. And the opposite side of that is to not lose the argument. We could try not to lose the argument because we're afraid we might look silly, or we'll be shown that we're wrong and somebody else is right, and not liking the idea that we've been shown to be wrong about something. And another one can be trying to persuade someone. This can be a very common form of why we will argue, is because we're trying to persuade either the person we're arguing with, or we're trying to persuade an audience. For instance, in debates, when you ever watch political debates or intellectual debates on television, you'll see they'll be not really trying to persuade the opponent in the debate, they'll be trying to persuade the audience. So persuasion can be a very common common reason to why we will try to argue. Since persuasion is the more common reason to why we might argue, it's good to go over some important things about persuasion. Sometimes you might hear a term used in political arguments or different kinds of discussions, the term rhetoric. Rhetoric means the art of persuasion. So what it is the way we can go about persuading people in certain things. Normally it's used in a negative sense, and there's reasons to why that's the case, but it's not negative in of itself. But it'll be good to know some reasons to why we need to be careful when the goal is persuasion. The first is that good arguments won't necessarily persuade someone. Sometimes when someone is putting forward an argument, they could be very charismatic. They can sound very confident in what they're saying, and sometimes people can be persuaded by that, even though the arguments aren't very good. So bad arguments can sometimes persuade. So this is something to be very careful of when you're finding someone using tactics which are good at persuasion. So in philosophy, the goal is about giving knowledge and getting knowledge. These are the two main goals we're trying to get out of philosophy. In fact, the term philosophy in Latin is philosophia, which translates to the love of wisdom. So in philosophy, it's all about knowledge. Persuasion may end up a part of that, but the main thing we want to argue as philosophers is to give people knowledge and to get knowledge from others. Regarding giving knowledge, we can give someone knowledge by giving them a good argument. Because if you can give someone a good argument and they can see that's a good argument, you can give them knowledge of our conclusion we're trying to draw. So if our premises are good and the argument supports the conclusion, we can give them knowledge of that new conclusion. Sometimes they might not see that's a good argument. They might be unpersuaded by our argument. If this is the case, sometimes there's a bit of a consolation prize, though, that you've at least given them a new perspective on why you believe that particular conclusion, and maybe over time they might see that it is a good argument after all, or after doing some research or thinking about some more, and they can come to know the conclusion. But even if they don't, they do know a new argument for something that they are skeptical about or they reject. But the problem here with persuasion, when we were talking about in the previous slide, is if you do persuade someone with a bad argument, you haven't given them knowledge. So this is why the goal should always be to give people knowledge through giving them good arguments, as opposed to trying to persuade them. Because if you persuade them with a bad argument, you have not given them knowledge. The other side of the coin is getting knowledge. We can get knowledge when we give an argument by somebody considering the argument and then showing that there's some error in the reasoning, that there's something about the logic of the argument which is in error. Sometimes we can think it's logical, but then someone can point out somewhere we've gone wrong. So we can get knowledge that way. The other way we can get knowledge is if sometimes the reasons we give we might think are correct, but then they might have evidence to show that it's in fact not correct. So we've gained some knowledge this way. We've thought something was correct or thought something was a good argument, and then they've demonstrated to us that it's not. So that's one way we can get knowledge. The other way we can get knowledge is just by knowing the objections to the argument that you've got. You might not be convinced that the objections they give, but you'll know what the objections are. You've tested your argument against a series of objections, so we know something more now by knowing that this is what some people will object to, even though we may not agree with those objections. We have gained some knowledge by knowing what they are. And finally, we can know the conclusion. Sometimes we can give an argument and they may be able to give a better argument for something else. So then we've been able to know a new conclusion from somebody else offering a counter argument. So if you want more information regarding this part of the topic, you can go onto the website www.philosophycriticalthinking.com, or you can purchase the book Understanding Arguments by Walter St. Armstrong and Robert Fogelin, which will be in the description. If you click on the link, you can go purchase that, or you can go onto the website. Our next video, we're going to finally start getting into certain criteria on what makes good arguments and bad arguments, and a certain part of that is the difference between valid arguments and invalid arguments, which we'll be discussing in our next video. If you want to stay in tune for more tutorials and more videos, please subscribe and click the bell. Thanks.